As I've grown as a world builder, I've come to enjoy making my worlds more outlandish, but I once was very strict about making my setting more scientifically grounded, first building the star, then the planets, then the moons, to only at the end start working where the story actually happens. But I moved away from this method as I had a lot of problems with it. First, it kinda stifled my creativity a bit, but worst of all, I ended up reworking a lot of stuff, as by defining the star first, I chose random information for it that only got contextualized in the end, by which point I typically regretted the outcome of my choices. And don't get me wrong, this method is still great for sci-fi settings, especially those where no individual planet hogs the spotlight with a lot of stellar systems. But I now believe that any world building project should start with its most defining feature. And by that I don't mean characters or stories, but what most differs your world from our own. Or at least you should have a very strong reason to have an Earth-like planet that specifically isn't Earth, for example spec-evo projects. Starting with the difference could look something like: a gash runs across the land, the aftermath of a living comet's landing, the egg of a dragon where its imminent hatching threatens the world, or the moon comes and goes in its eccentric orbit, periodically stealing the world's oceans, only to give them back in its next cycle. These are quite simple and short ideas, and yet they create countless problems and ways in which your world needs to be shaped around them. Obviously, sci-fi is a lot more limiting on what can be perceived as possible, but one idea I see myself getting back into again and again is differently colored plants. It's a small and subtle change that can feel very jarring. A good example being infrared photography, or more mainstream, Elden Ring's Altus Plateau region. And that brings us to the actual topic of this video: differently colored plants. It's of course not an original idea, it's based on the wonderful Artifactions video, Plants and Sky Colors, but ever since I saw that video I kind of felt like the tools that he provided were a bit lacking, so I made my own, HueSynth, a passion project and a hydra that I have been occasionally fighting since that first video came out 5 or 6 years ago. But I'm finally happy enough with its state to properly share it with the world, and even still I have some updates that I want to add to it. Now, taking a look here over the website, you can see that there's a lot of numbers going on, but the only one that matters is the mass. It is the only one that you can change, and there are a lot of ways to change it. The easiest one being just clicking it and inputting a value manually. But you can also use this range slider, these plus and minus buttons, the arrow keys, or if you're in a phone, you can swipe left and right. So with that out of the way, let me explain what these other numbers mean. The most important ones are the ones inside this box. The first one is the luminosity of your star, basically how bright it is relative to our sun. Second one is the temperature of your star in Kelvin. Third one, diameter or radius, how big your star is relative to our sun. And the last one, age or lifespan of your star in billions of years. But if you have a brighter, faster burning star, it will eventually be in millions of years. These two other numbers are more for decoration, but they also mean something. The one inside the box is the type of your star, with the first two characters just being a different way to represent temperature, and the third one being what kind of star it is. In this case, being main sequence, because the app only outputs one kind of star. And the last number that talks about your star, the faded number underneath the box, is the peak wavelength of your star. Basically, what kind of light the star shines the most. Now, the meat of this app, the primary and secondary color strategies for plants. The primary strategy is just called that because it's the most common color for plants here on Earth, but it doesn't mean that the secondary strategy is any less viable on your project. You can see that there's also the hex codes for the colors, and this little asterisk here means that the star is viable for intelligent life. If we go outside of the bounds of intelligent life, it will disappear, and if we keep going even further, it will eventually be outside the bounds for multicellular life, and we'll be stuck with only the primary strategy, because it's what the most successful photosynthetic single cells use here on Earth. And if we keep going over, even still, we'll eventually reach into a point where the star does not support any life forms. These ranges are very broad, so I recommend you staying inside them for your evolutionary projects, but they do not mean that any intelligent life or any life couldn't colonize the planet afterwards. It just means that that kind of life would be unlikely to evolve in a stellar system with this kind of star. And if you really want to nerd out about your colors, you can go in this question mark on the top right of the screen and change the color space of the app. The difference is very subtle. You can see that there's a little bit more saturated for the sRGB color space, and I won't get into too much detail in what's the difference between sRGB and Adobe color spaces, as that's a topic that I want to cover in another video. Other than that, I hope that you enjoyed this video and it's of use for a future world building. And if you really enjoyed it, consider supporting my work. I do commissions and also sell some artsy stuff over on Ko-fi. Thanks for watching.